Today, for episode 13 of Film Talk, I will be reviewing the hit horror film from 2001, 13 Ghosts, directed by Steve Beck. This is a remake of the 1960 film of the same name, and it is bad. Okay, right from the start, it's a bad film. It's very much a product of its time. It's very much a horror film from that period of like early 90s, no, sorry, late 90s to early 2000s. And I'm saying it's bad, but for some reason I am slightly drawn to this film in the sense that I'm sure I've seen it a few times. If it comes on television, I'll probably watch it. You know, it'll be on in the background. I won't pay too much attention to it. And there is a very faint charm to it that I'm going to try and explain with this review, whilst obviously concluding that it is it's not a good film. As I've already said, it came out in 2001, and I think part of it is that horror films from that era do have a quaint charm to them, at least for me, because I think those were the kind of horror films that came out when I was very young. You know, when people talked about new horror films, it tended to be films like this. 13 Ghosts, Jeepers Creepers, for instance, or the Blair Witch Project, Scream. I guess I Know What You Did Last Summer. Films like that. Films usually that had quite young casts. They were shot in particular ways. And it stands out to me for that reason. And also, I'm a big fan of two of the main actors in the film. So you've got Tony Shalhoub, who played Adrian Monk, one of my favourite television characters of all time, and F. Murray Abraham, who was in Amadeus, who won the best actor Oscar for Amadeus. It's a film I reviewed several weeks ago. Two fantastic actors. They rarely put a foot wrong. Unfortunately, this is perhaps one of those instances. I guess we'll focus on reasons why the film doesn't really work. And as a horror film, it doesn't really do anything for me. A lot of it's very sort of over the top. There's no, horror for me. I like my horror quite subtle. Whereas this film is very much in your face in terms of the direction. There's a lot of sort of Evil Dead imitation camera work, where it's like point of view of the ghosts and it's like shaking everywhere, and there's these really, I would characterize as obnoxious editing. So anytime there's ghosts or anytime there's like some action going on, there's these really quickly edited scenes where there's lots of noise, lots of bright, sort of seizure-inducing lights. The editing in the film is terrible. The direction is really misguided in my view, and it just anytime one of the ghosts comes on, it's almost like you're being visually assaulted. And that's one of the things that I always think of when I think of this film. It's a visual assault. And it doesn't really work. There's very little, if any, suspense in the film. There's not really very much horror. And the plot as well. I always thought that this film would have worked better. So the plot of the film is that F. Murray Abraham's character has accumulated these ghosts that he hides in this big glass mansion. He ostensibly dies at the start of the film, and I think it's his nephew, Tony Shalhoub, and his family move into the glass house, and the ghosts are all trapped in the basement essentially, and then havoc ensues. I always thought the film would have been more interesting if it had focused on F. Murray Abraham tracking down all of these ghosts, because at the start of the film you see him capture the last one. But it would have been more interesting, I thought, to go that route. I guess maybe you would have drawn unfavourable comparisons with Ghostbusters, but I personally think that would have been slightly more interesting than just the sort of haunted house route. The characters as well. I feel it's a shame because you've got some great actors in this film, but the characters are pretty bad. They're not very well developed. They're sympathetic, yes, but there's just really not much going on there. I think someone like Tony Shalhoub just should not be cast in a horror film. This is not his genre to excel. I think he does best when he's in sort of quirky drama. You know what I mean? It's not. It's this a horror film is not his natural habitat. Um, Matthew Lillard, aka Shaggy from the live action Scooby Doo films, plays a character in this film that is just so annoying. Like every scene, he's like kind of wailing and drooling and whining, and it's just such a bad performance. Um, and it's a shame because he's quite pivotal actually to the story. But there's quite a bit of that in the film. Some quite poor characterization. Um, Having said that, the production design for the film I think is quite nice. You know, the idea of this big glass house, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think something like that had been attempted before, and it must have been quite a difficult task for the director of photography. Um, Trying to shoot in a glass house, I imagine you'd have to deal with lots of reflections and being able to see things through the glass that you don't want to see. So I think, I mean, I guess they do a good job with that. I have to praise them for it. Um, but the editing, as I said earlier, is awful. The the makeup effects for the ghosts when you actually see it, and it's not just a sort of fastly edited nightmare, is good. Um, they're quite creative with it. Um, the CGI in some scenes, like when you've got the big sort of engine of the house essentially effect, looks really bad. It's very much a product of its time. A lot of horror films in the late 90s, early 2000s had appalling CGI, and I think it's because I think it's because they were excited, with this new medium. They were able to do new things. They didn't need to use practical effects as much, but really something like that should have been a practical effect because the technology just wasn't there, or they didn't have the money to make it look good. Um, Overall, thinking about the film as a whole, I mean, it's a hard film to hate, just because there are elements of creativity to it, and the characters are mostly fine. They're mostly sympathetic, um, but yeah, just even digging into that, some of the things involving the ghosts just it makes for bad horror. There's no real suspense. There's no real stakes. One thing I noticed is really you don't. The scenes with the ghosts are just so fastly edited. You don't actually see how they interact with people. I mean, they're portrayed as quite menacing, but all you really see them do is like throw people around. And it's not really clear how they interact, and it's always quite just sort of headache inducing. Um, and there's a few plot twists in the film, particularly involving um, a woman that shows up. She's a ghost liberator. She thinks it's bad that all these ghosts are trapped. She wants them to be freed, even though they're all like sort of violent murdering ghosts. There's a plot twist with her character that just was completely incoherent and made me roll my eyes. And there's a twist involving F. Murray Abraham's character as well that again was just very stupid. Um, Although a positive thing to say about the film, it's shot in British Columbia, and I was able to tell that just from the way that just from the look of the film, from the scenes where they're outside. British Columbia in Canada is one of my sort of favourite regions for shooting films. It's where it lends itself. It's one of these places that lends itself to very nice looking film and television. I think it's where most of the X Files was shot, the TV show, and some films as well. I think it always makes for a really interesting color palette in films just because of the climate they get there. Some of the scenery as well. So that was something in the film's favour. I like. I think it's refreshing to see a film shot in British Columbia / the Pacific Northwest. I think it's a really nice sort of photogenic, atmospheric area. Um, but overall, I went on a little tangent there. I think this film isn't very good. The plot is kind of rubbish. The characters aren't great. The acting's quite bad in some scenes. It's got lots of horror cliches. For instance, they all split up. You know, they attempt jump scares, but there's no tension. There's no suspense. Um, the film just, as much as I do have an iota of admiration for it, you know, just for some of the set design, some of the you know, the presence of, you know, F. Murray Abraham and Tony Shalhoub. I mean, they are trying. They're great actors. As much as I do have an iota of respect for the film, it's not good. It doesn't really work. And overall, as a rating, I'm being slightly generous with it. This is slightly higher than what I'd envisaged it. You know, at the start of this review, I'm going to give it 36 out of 100. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I have a slight admiration for it, to the point where I would watch it probably if it came on late at night and I didn't have anything else to do. Um, but yeah, not quite a recommendation overall.